All right. Okay. All right.
Lesson 5. Meaning in the Unchosen.
Okay.
1.
Okay. There we go. All right. We're holding lesson 5 in our course over here on meaning. Yeah, last week we really examined at great length the concept of time. But let's back up and kind of recap where we are until now. So we started with lesson 1. Lesson 1 taught us a very important truth, which is that all of us have a hunger for more in our life than just pleasure and success, et cetera, et cetera. We all realize that we are living for something more, and so we defined meaning. We said that ultimately that is really what we are that a person that brings a person happiness. It's not having all the stuff that they could want, but rather to have things that make them feel meaningful and like their life has substance. But what was interesting is that by the end of lesson 1, even though we pointed out that we have those 4 buckets of meaning that are similar to the tree, things that help us grow, things that help us be productive, things that help us share, etc. But then we turn to Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest man, and one could argue the one who lived the most meaningful life. And he says still, Hevel Havalim Hakol Havel. After he cataloged not only his great successes, but all his great achievements in meaning. And still he said Havel Havalim. And we said Leo Tolstoy also, from the secular end of the spectrum, also was incredibly successful and also lived a life of tremendous meaning in the fact that he wrote books and impacted millions. And still, by the end of his life, he felt it was all arbitrary and he was contemplating committing suicide. And so then we pointed out that meaning, if your understanding of meaning is that you live in a void, that your life is a void, it's just an empty container, and you fill it with whatever is meaningful to you, then there's always going to be an element of arbitrariness to it. Because deep down, you'll always have that little feeling that says, this is meaningful to me, but is it really meaningful, period? Is it really meaningful? Or maybe I'm just engaged in delusion. And really, this doesn't happen to people that are just like the people that are climbing the ladder of success, if unless they reach, get relatively close to the top, where they can sense that my lack of happiness or satisfaction is not because I'm not close to the top or at the top. It's actually because this ladder that I'm climbing is not really the secret to great satisfaction. Then the same thing happens with meaning. You only get to the point where you're questioning meaning, the things that are meaningful to you, once you've kind of really achieved success in that peak meaning. And then you wait a minute, kind of have a secondary midlife crisis of meaning. I said, is this in fact really meaningful? Or is it just me deciding it's meaningful? And why would you even be asking yourself that question? And the reason that you're asking yourself that question, as we determined in lesson 2, is because ultimately it's not just about any type of meaning. That sense of arbitrariness is because deep down you have an awareness that you are actually created on purpose. And because you're created on purpose, you're created for purpose. And because you're created for a purpose, until you'll be achieving that specific purpose, there is going to be a sense of arbitrariness for anything else that you might define even as meaningful. As we said, that story of the Sefer Torah, that even being in a museum and having everybody ooh and ah and in fact be inspired by it still would not be meaningful, the same level of satisfaction as being in an old shtibel actually being read from, fulfilling its raison d'etre. And so the same applies, and that's only because we were created on purpose. When you create a hammer for a specific reason, you can imagine that if you would anthropomorphize that hammer, it would not feel truly satisfied until it's fulfilling its actual purpose, its raison d'etre, its reason that it was made to be. So that's what we arrived at lesson two. Lesson two is actually, and that is empowering as we flowed from lesson two into lesson three. Because it turns out that you are not the hero of your own story, as it were. Or rather, not that you're not the hero, but you're not the conclusion. You're not the end. You're not the dead end of your own story. You could actually be, you're the hero of your story, but you're a hero in the fact that you serve. Life is where you can serve rather than life serving you. Because as backwards as it sounds, as counterintuitive as it sounds, it's actually a lot more satisfying to live a life that's not serving you, but that you're serving something greater. Again, if ultimately that's what you were created for, a hammer doesn't want to be tucked in and on a plush cushion and be, let's say, let's have the handle finely oiled all the time and the metal buffed and it's getting really treated beautifully, et cetera, et cetera. The hammer is going to feel a void in that because it was created to be a tool, to serve, to do something, to affect change. And until it's doing that, it's never going to truly feel fulfilled. And now that we understand that the world was created for a purpose, and I'm a cog in that wheel, I'm a cog in that machine, I'm a wheel in that machine, then that's going to be finding and discovering my purpose is actually what's going to bring me that greatest sense of fulfillment. And what's remarkable about it is that I've just expanded the scope of my own universe. Because if the world, if my entire life, right, if my entire existence is Nancy-centric, right, if this is, then the world is only as big as I am. The scope of it is only as big as I am. It also puts me almost at immediate odds with everybody, even the person I care most about, because they're walking around and they've been taught to think that the world is sender-centric. So, which means that we're in opposition to each other. Our worlds are in opposition, the resources, et cetera, et cetera. And that is why, unfortunately, with this attitude that has been established in the United States, most relationships end in divorce. Most kids and parents have a very fractious relationship. Even colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. It's all pretty much a transactional. We're in a world where it's very transactional, especially a town like Washington, D.C., where the ultimate line about Washington, D.C. is, what have you done for me lately? Right? I'll do something for you, but only if I feel that there's a reciprocation over here, because ultimately, that's not wrong if we understand that our attitude about life, about world, is that I'm at the center of my own life, and everything that's here is meant to, my attitude towards everything is, how does this bring me meaning? How does this bring me fulfillment? How does this bring me a satisfaction? Everything here is just to serve me. Well, guess what? Somebody else is in the room and he believes everything in this room is just to serve him. Do you understand the inherent conflict and problem in this? And ultimately, you're both wrong. Because this is bigger and vaster. And also, the problem is, what happens if I can't define meaning in something? Or define meaning in a moment? Then that's a big hole. Think about it along the lines, and this is actually where we're going to spend most of the time in lesson 5. But if you are the one who has to attribute meaning and purpose based on whatever you feel it is, then you, let's say, will do 10, 15, let's say you're an incredibly productive kind of person. You did 30 purposeful things today, right? On average, how much time would you say you would talk? Oh, 10 minutes, 20 minutes I spent on each one. Let's say, and you did 30 of them. It's a remarkably amount of productivity. But it means still that most of your day was just barren landscape until you have these blips of productivity. Most of us are probably only doing 5 or 6 things that we can attribute to actually being productive or meaningful, whatever it is. Everything else is the commute to work, right? The phone call that went nowhere, right? Preparing a coffee, then having it spill on the floor, all these things that we go through, are even things that are relatively serve a purpose, but they're not what I would say like brushing my teeth or whatever it is. So if you're thinking about it, I'm doomed to spend the vast majority of my waking hours engaged in things that are part of the barren wasteland with the hopes that I'll every once in a while have a blip on the radar of meaning and purpose. But if we change this whole attitude and say, I'm here to serve, and I'm part of an entire symphony, then everything is part of that. Which led us into lesson 4. Lesson 4, we talked about that symphony, the symphony as discovered in time, and how really truly life is not just repetition. Let's say I even have succeeded, because each lesson builds on the last one. I've succeeded in finding that even brushing my teeth is a purposeful action, and I can get behind that idea that I am here to serve, and my hygiene is important so that I am functioning at my best to serve a greater purpose. Doing the laundry is repairing the laundry machine is all part of serving that purpose. But after a while, it would seem to get repetitive. Doing the right thing can often become then boring, because every day I'm getting up, doing the right thing, and doing it again tomorrow. What was on the agenda today? To be a good person. What's on the agenda tomorrow? To be a good person, a good, productive person. What's on the agenda for the? Well, more of the same, right? So is that what we are kind of doomed to have? Is now that I've defined a sense of purpose. Yes, it's very exciting in the beginning because I'm discovering purpose in all things, but then tomorrow is we're right back at it. And that's why Yiddishkeit tells you, no, there's an entire symphony and a vitality and a rhythm to life. No day is like the day before it, period. No minute, honestly, is like the minute before it. Time is incredibly dynamic by itself and demands of you to be a different person every single day. And we talked about the holidays, how in Judaism, it's not like every day is the exact same, but because an event occurred on a day, then after the fact, the day now has kind of special meaning. No, the day carried this reverberation, even from the moment of creation, even before whatever particular event occurred. In fact, that event is only a fruition of what this day always had the potential to be, always is. And so if the day of the 15th of Nisan was the day that the Jews left Egypt, that did not create the 15th of Nisan. That actually was just the fruition of what the 15th of Nisan was from the get-go. The 15th of Nisan is not like the 14th of Nisan. While the 4th of July is just like the 5th of July, the 6th of July, etc., except that arbitrarily some event happened to occur on the 4th. It could have occurred on the 5th or it could have occurred on the 3rd. It just happened to have occurred on the 4th, and we commemorate it by having hot dogs and burgers. But a hot dog tastes the exact same on the 5th as it tastes on the 3rd, because there's nothing inherently essential about the 4th and its connection to hot dogs and fireworks, etc. And even America and the red, white, and blue. It happens to be that an event occurred. Judaism, no. Shabbos is not Friday, and it's not Monday. It is Shabbos. It's a unique day with an entirely different essential nature. So the way you were being a good, productive, purposeful person on Friday, you're going to be doing it totally different on Shabbat. And by the way, you're going to be doing it different on this Shabbat than you'll be doing it on next Shabbat and the Shabbat after that, because each one of them have their own inherent quality. These Shabbats belong to the month of Kislev, which has its own nature compared to the month of Tevet. And this year has a different nature than next year. So this mode of finding purpose and meaning on this particular Tuesday, the 5th of Kislev, in the year 5786, today, will never be exactly like this again. It's a unique day, and embrace it, because it's never coming again. And so every day we wake up, and this is the way a purposeful person lives. It says, today is the sixth, or today is Wednesday, tomorrow, let's say, the 6th of Kislev in the year 5786. What is unique on the agenda today? How do I tap in and vibe with the rhythm of today? So every day is dynamic, every day is different. Even if the things that you are doing seem to be similar to the stuff you did yesterday, but you're doing it with an entirely different feeling. And that makes every day fun and exciting. So this is how you can live and put things into your schedule and put yourself in a mindset to really create a tremendous amount of purpose, etc. Here's the problem. We've spoken till now about all the things that you can choose to focus on, to put into your days, etc., to give yourself a sense of purpose. What happens, however, if you are mired in the thing that you didn't choose, you didn't expect, you didn't count on? From something as benign as you did not expect for there to be a traffic jam and now you're 40 minutes late. So even before arriving late at work, sitting in the traffic jam, or something more, whatever it is, an actual failure. Have you just detoured from purpose? And now your goal is to get back to purpose as fast as possible. Have you just detoured from meaning and substance? Most people would say, yes, this is not part of the plan. And my goal is to get out of this as soon and as quickly as possible, to not allow it to affect me so much, to not be pulled that far down and deep into this muck and mire of these things that did not go as planned, right? Ask yourself, what generally is your kind of mental strategy for an unanticipated 40-minute traffic jam?
Wouldn't have listened to other ones.
Oh, okay. So you're already adding in but what's the mental state? For most people, it's like, let me maintain some equilibrium. Let's try to make the best out of a bad situation, right? Etc. Let me try not to become overly frustrated so that I don't show up to work and compound my lateness with my frustration and etc., right? What happens if you try something purposeful and meaningful and you fail? What's your attitude then? What's the tonic? What is the tonic in general for when things don't go as planned? So here we have a little exercise that you could choose to do. It's exercise 5.1. It's things that you choose to do that are meaningful. So an example would be just shout out anything that you would choose to do that's meaningful, that you can choose to put in your day that's meaningful.
A lot of stuff that I don't pay any attention to, and it bothers me. And if I have a dull moment, it enables some of that stuff to bubble up. And I say, geez, it's about time that I did this.
Oh, okay, good. So you're getting a step ahead. So you're already talking about step two and how to do it. But we're going to back up. Things that are deliberately meaningful that you choose to put into your life. A day of work, earning a living. What else? A Torah class. What you're doing right now. Something else?
Read the kids.
Read with the kids. Now, it's easy to find meaning in these things because that's why you're doing them. You're doing them because you've defined that these are things that bring meaning, and so you're doing them. You choose to do them. Now, what happens? Things that happen to you that are not planned. Think about today. What are things that you did not expect that happened to you today? Anybody comfortable sharing something? Again, it could be as simple as I got stuck in traffic.
Us delegating meetings that I really wasn't keen on.
Okay, good, right? All of a sudden, a deviation in what the anticipated schedule of your productive day. Anything else? A phone call from somebody you didn't want, or again, working on something. I can tell you, I was working on today on a particular a piece of the marketing that was going to go out about Hanukkah, and then lost it all. 50 minutes down the drain. Okay, not my plan. I did not plan on having that be the thing that was going to happen, right? So all this, so the first batch of things, okay, that's we've been focusing on that up until now, saying how to kind of define, put in, choose to have meaning and purpose in your life. But what is the strategy for finding meaning and purpose in the things that you didn't choose but are happening to you? So Yiddishkeit actually has uh, uh, so much on this to say, especially because, as we know, that's the majority of what happens in your life. It's not the things you choose, but to have happen, but the things that just happen. Now, sometimes it's a pleasant coincidence, and it turns out into something that is very easily seen as something that is productive and purposeful and meaningful. But it seems to be a crapshoot. In fact, most of the time, it's probably not that way. But Yiddishkeit, what we're going to find out, actually teaches you how every single moment, whatever it is that occurs to you, actually there is a universal approach to finding meaning and purpose in it. And that's what makes this, what we're about to learn, so compelling. So to be able to understand that, we have to start from the beginning. Okay. And let's start by asking as follows. If most of the day I am not writing the script of my life, right? That's basically another way of phrasing it. If most of the day I'm not the one writing the script of my life, then who is? So most people, even Jews, will say it's kind of just random circumstance. However, what is the answer according to Torah? God. God is writing the script of your day. How much of the script? All of it. All the script of your day is being written by God. This is not a new agey kind of Kabbalistic kind of thing that isn't a fundamental in Judaism, and maybe it's like some Hasidic concept. No. The Rambam, Maimonides, gives us the 13 principles of faith, right? The Anima Amins. This says this defines the faith structure of all of Judaism. These are the doctrines, the fundamental doctrines of Judaism. And what does he say? Number one is text one over here on page 128. I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the Creator. He created the world, but then he goes further and is the guide of all created things, all created beings. Right? He alone, and we'll get to in a moment to the second part of his statement over here. He alone makes and will make all things. Here's the thing. Already in fundamental number one, it's a lot more than most people think it is. Most people think that fundamental number one is to believe that there was a creator, that this world did not come about by accident. But the Rambam is saying significantly more than that. He's saying that he's the Borei, in Hebrew it's the Borei, but then the Rambam adds another big key word, Umanhig, and the director, which is not a given, especially across all other religions, right? The other religions, is it accepted as a given that God stays involved directing everything that is occurring? Maintaining some amount of control over everything that happens? He created the world. We owe him fealty. So when we go about and we're in this world of random chaos, etc., we try to direct things in the direction that we think he would like. He created, he took a step back. It's for us now. It's our world to run, and we should try to direct the world in a way that we think he would appreciate. That would be what most religious doctrine is. Here we're saying something different. No, God remains hands-on. He remains an active director to this world, which is why we have an idea about God that he is the Kol Yachol, that he is omnipotent, right? And things ultimately, anything kind of, and all the major events that occur, God has some control over it. He wouldn't let certain things. It's our big issue, for example, with exactly, right? The Holocaust. God, if you are active, how did you let this happen, right? But even that turn of phrase limits. How's that expression go again? How do we all say it? How did you let this happen? Which means that we are accusing God of remaining a little too passive, right? And not getting involved. We would think that this would be a place where God kind of steps off like a parent in a park. This is how we say the next level, the next step up in our belief system in terms of God not just creating the world and walking away, is that God stands like a parent on the periphery of a park. Kids are running around doing their things, and we expect that if things ever get really bad, God, who's watching, will step in. And he wouldn't let this happen. I remember that I went to Cabin John Park and I was climbing on the top of a tube slide. I should have been inside the tube slide, but I was too cool for that. So I was climbing on the top, on the outside, climbing upward, backward, basically, because that's what the cool kids do when they outgrow the silly stuff of a park. And so I was calling on the top, and sure enough, I got to a certain point where, ironically, there's a guard to protect people from doing exactly what I'm doing. So there's a panel that doesn't allow you to continue climbing up. So I thought I'm going to do this like ninja move. I'm going to like slide to the side and climb up sideways on this thing. I slid sideways and kept on sliding, fell off, hit myself on a sign that says, "Do keep off of top of slide." And I hit the ground. And the first thing I did is I looked at my mother, who was like frozen. She had turned away for a second and then sees me falling through the air. I said, "Why didn't you catch me?" with the expectation that somehow, something catastrophic would happen. She would be there. How, God, could you have allowed the Holocaust to happen? The truth is, from a proper Jewish perspective, the question is even stronger on God, theologically or philosophically. Why did you make it happen? Because God is actively involved. Actively involved, not just that he's passively standing there while the world plays out, ready to intervene if things get truly out of hand. God is actively involved. Look at the expression of the Rambam. He alone made, makes, and will make all things. All things. Not just he made it back then, he made all things and now they're spinning off. He made, will make, made, makes currently, and will make in the future all things. Now, this sense of God's continued involvement is actually not just a philosophical point, it's actually backed up by science. Backed up by science. If we believe that either there is nothing above us, or the thing above us is non-consequential, then we are faulty beings, because psychologists, neurosciences have come to realize that every single human being has a predisposition to be aware of something above them. And that to a certain degree, to be a landing dock for this thing. The brain is a landing dock for this thing. There's like a place, almost a place to plug in a higher awareness, which is why nearly every culture across all existence have some sort of doctrine of something higher, How did that happen? There wasn't one person walking around the whole world influencing everybody, that there's some big thing in the sky that they can't see or touch or whatever it is. And yet pretty much across all cultures across the world have this innate awareness, which would only make sense if that thing was exist and it was consequential in our lives. So science actually confirms this presence because your mind is already tuned to it. Which is why at a time and at a point where there's a deliberate effort to not have you focus on that, to have you believe that you're at the top of your of this whole food chain. There's nothing above you to be concerned about. People are actually responding to that in a very deleterious fashion. And the tonic in society is actually giving people spirituality, giving people something higher. This is where the science and psychology has kind of arrived at an awareness of this issue. Spiritual wiring, as they call it. Text 2. This is from Lisa Miller, PhD, called in her book, the famous book, The Awakened Brain. Right? Each of us is endowed with a natural capacity to perceive a greater reality and consciously connect to the life force that moves in, through, and around us. Whether or not we participate in spiritual practice or adhere to a faith tradition, whether or not we identify as religious or spiritual, our brain has a natural inclination toward and a docking station for spiritual awareness. An awakened brain is available to all of us right here in our neural circuitry, but we have to choose to engage it. It's a muscle we can learn to strengthen or let atrophy. So it's there. There's a part of your brain that is a docking station for this idea. Do you realize, do you want to know if what the most recent poll of people across the world, how much believe in some version of a God? What would you estimate that at? Whatever that version is. But do you believe that there is some higher being? Over 90%. Do you have that kind of consensus on anything? We don't even have that kind of consensus on what is a man and what is a woman. And yet on this, over 90% consensus. So something that by all kind of scientific factors you can't prove. And there's no clear evidence. Why? Why is it so? Because ultimately, our brains are wired to acknowledge this truth. That God does, there wasn't just a creator either 5,786 years ago or by let's say scientific or kind of agnostic measures X number of millions of years ago. There's a God now. There's a God here. And that is why your brain is wired to seek him out. Now, we Jews especially have this. We are maminim b'nei maminim, believers, the children of believers. Do you know right now what is going on in Israel? A mass reawakening to faith. Since October 7th, actually. You would think it would go the other way. After we suffered such a tragedy, you would assume that it would go the other way. No, it's actually a huge resurgence of faith and connection to God. Because it's kind of in our disposition. Now, here's the thing. We're going to actually make an argument that not only is God a continued active presence, but it goes down to the smallest, tiniest little detail. God is not just writing the general script of the world, not just writing the general script of your life. God is writing line by line of everything that will happen to you, occurs to you, and every other little thing that happens in your sphere of existence. And that makes perfect logical sense. In fact, to say anything else actually is far more challenging. Yes. Hold that question. Just Same question. The answer is you have just touched on the biggest paradox in Judaism. But it can only exist as a paradox if both things are equally true. That free will is absolutely true, and God's involvement in every moment is also absolutely true. In other words, otherwise it's not a paradox. It's a very simple answer. You have free will and God's not involved. Or God's only involved in the general, right? Like a parent, right? A child in a playground could claim to have free will. I can run to go on the slide. I can go on the monkey bars, right? Parents only going to step in one. But once we start saying that God is directly involved, that would seem to inhibit free will. So the fact that this is a paradox that exists means that both have to be robustly true. That you do have free will, 100%, or at least 99.8%. That's a topic for a different conversation. But equally as true is that everything that occurs is entirely as per God's script. Entirely. So it makes the question not only, God, how did you make the Holocaust happen? God, how did you do every little thing from the curl of the chimney coming out of the crematorium? The curl of the smoke out of the chimney from the crematorium. Yes. And to a certain degree, this is the question that was not only asked by us now, afterwards, and it's not blasphemous to ask it, but asked by, we know the story, they put God on trial in Auschwitz, found him guilty. They had no good explanation as to why, God, you can be making this happen to us. And then they went ahead and davened mincha anyway. But we're not going to be focusing on that theological aspect of it. We're not. I haven't. We have some. Not. I haven't answered, but there's some. There are words to speak to this. We're also not going to really be focusing on the interplay of your free will. That's more kind of a philosophical course. This is not a philosophical course. This is a practical course to inject a greater sense of purpose and meaning in your daily life. And as such, we're going to focus on the truth of this. Now you can say, why? Who says? Well, let's talk about this. How do we know that this is the Jewish perspective? That God is actively engaged in every single most minute detail of everything. Because it's the natural outcome of what has to be the circumstance. What am I talking about? Here is a line that we say in our prayer every single day. Text 3. HaMechadesh b'tuvo b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit. Right? Which means, to translate as follows, in his goodness, God renews each day continually the act of creation. As it says, give thanks to him who makes the luminaries, for his kindness is eternal. Let me explain what this means. When did God create the world? How long ago did God create the world? According to Judaism, how long did God create the world? 5,786 years ago. Wrong. He created the world this very moment. And then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, and this one. He's constantly in a process of recreating. To a certain degree, it's only because we're going to use a time reference, even though it's not really. Every single second, the world blinks out of existence and is rebuilt again from scratch. From scratch. Every single second. Every single second, God is in a constant state of redoing the world. So every single second, creation is happening. Every moment, creation is happening. As one of the great sages of the 16th century, and the 16th and 17th century, the Shalah, he was actually a rabbi in Europe, in Frankfurt, Germany, and then eventually made Aliyah, moved to Israel, and passed away in Tveria. His name was Rav Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz. He wrote the Shnei Luchot Habrit, his great magnum opus, which the acronym of Shnei Luchot Habrit is Shalah, and so he's known as the Shalah. And truly a universally revered scholar on Kabbalah, on Halacha, on all matters. He's actually buried right next to the Rambam in Tiberias. And he writes as follows, text 4. This is where Judaism departs from what most is the common understanding of God's involvement in the world. The common understanding of how the heavenly forces operate is that God, the blessed creator, brought everything into being from absolute nothingness, and therefore has the power to do whatever he wills, even to override or suspend the natural order. At the outset, he assigned spiritual forces to govern the world, each one appointed over its own realm. The world continues to function according to these systems, as if his hand has stepped back. Except on such occasions where he chooses to intervene and override them. Until then, these forces operate through the power he originally placed within them at the time of creation. I.e., this is what most people think. God created the world 5,786 years ago, let it go spinning, has obviously put into place the spiritual forces that will allow it to continue to spin, and he periodically sticks his hand into the mix and shakes things up when he feels necessary. But in truth, as it seems to me, our faith teaches otherwise. God, in his goodness, is constantly and deliberately renewing the act of creation every single day. His influence is ongoing and it's intentional. If for even a moment he were to withdraw this flow, everything would immediately dissolve into nothingness. All of existence would simply cease. If God would stop for even a moment, everything would just cease to be. The world exists because God is not only an active director, he is an active creator. God is actively creating the world from nothing every single moment, resetting the whole board every single second. Okay, now the Tanya goes, the great work of the Alter Rebbe, and he explains why logic necessitates this approach, why this is not just okay, fine, that's an interesting philosophical take on creation and the current reality. But says the Tanya, no, this actually is what logic would dictate. Why? Because most people make an assumption that the world is like a piece of pottery made by an artisan who could then put it on the shelf and walk away from it. Right? Right? If you would ask most people, yeah, sure, God created the world X number of years ago, put it on the shelf, like a potter could make a piece of pottery, put it on the shelf and walk away from it. What is the obvious difference between a potter and God vis-a-vis their creation?
God continues to.
But why? Why does that not? Did the potter create the clay? No. The clay pre-existed the potter's involvement. The potter took a clay that already exists, had a basis to exist, didn't need the potter to exist, right? And what did the potter do? Formed it. So this formed jug happily continues to exist after the potter's engagement, the same way it was happily existing before the potter's engagement. What existed before God created the world? Nothing. So before God's engagement, did any of this, anything, any matter, anything exist? Any concepts, any of this exist? No. It only exists because God forced it into existence. So what would happen the second God disengages? It would revert right back to its original state of nothingness. There is no basis for this thing to exist except for God's engagement. We see this with nature, in nature all the time. This right now is 6 feet off the ground. Does it have any basis to be 6 feet off the ground on its own? Anything in the nature of this thing gives it a default setting of being 6 feet off the ground. Why is it 6 feet off the ground? Because I'm holding it. The second I disengage, what will happen? It'll go back to its original nature. So do you understand that God needs to be actively creating the world every second? Were he to pull away for one moment, what would happen? It would cease to exist. You know else you have a good thing, example of this? All of us have phones. How many of you on your phone have pulled up a picture of of, let's say, a beautiful pastoral scene, a house, a photograph of a house with a man and a woman sitting there, right? Cows in the meadow, trees, right? A bird maybe flying through the sky, sun is shining, right? What would happen if you would cut off power to your phone? Would the man and woman rapidly start getting older and the cow also and the grass start to wither? Ludicrous, right? What would happen? It would blink out of existence. What do you mean? There was a really powerful mountain there, right? And the tree looked like it had been there for a long time, had grown many leaves. It would necessitate that it would take a very long time for all that to deteriorate to the point of non-existence. No. It only existed because the power infused in that, the energy. You remove the energy and poof, it's gone. If the divine energy is removed from here for a moment, if God's direct creative energy, creating us every second, so to a certain degree, what's really happening is we are reverting to nothingness, and then God is coaxing us back out of the nothingness every single second. Do you understand now?
Get to the God particle.
Yes, so we talked about this on Yom Kippur, right? There is now actually scientific evidence of this. This is an idea that has existed in Kabbalah and Hasidus for thousands of years. Most people, now science is starting to actually cover, we talked about this on Yom Kippur, the Higgs boson. They're smashing particles together because that's what boys do, right? They want to figure out how something works. They smash it together. They break it apart into smaller and smaller pieces. So we broke apart the molecule. We discovered it's an atom, right? Then we said we broke apart the atom. We discovered that there are subatomic particles, the protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then we realized that the electrons are not really giving any mass. That's not where matter really exists. Matter exists primarily in the protons and the neutrons. So what are protons and neutrons? What is giving mass? Right? What is giving mass to matter? So what's the protons and neutrons? What's the subatomic particle that is giving protons and neutrons their mass? And then they smash it together in hadron collider and they come up with nothing. The Higgs boson. What science calls, the cutting edge scientists working on this are calling it the God particle. Because it turns out it's not even an element, as I said, it's not really time. It's happening constant. That no mass is somehow mass. God is coaxing mass into existence every single moment. It's a remarkable thing. So we don't believe in the one-time creation. We believe in constant creation. And logic actually dictates that, as we proved. Now, again, this is not a philosophy class. This is not a theology class. This is about practical living. Why does this make a difference to me in my life? Because if you believe that this is the case, not if you believe, if you know that this is the case. Okay, you know what? Before we jump to that, let's watch. Well, the video will help make the point. Okay? God is creating the moment, the world moment by moment. This is the key thing. So if when God recreates this moment, he puts this thing in this place, guess what? That's on purpose. Which thing is God putting in its place? Everything. Every last thing. Every moment. God is actively wiping the chessboard gets wiped clean and God puts the pieces back. So of course God is not only aware where all the chess pieces is, God is deliberately putting it there, which means that everything that exists in where it exists and how it exists is a deliberate act of God. That is the obvious outflow of this. Everything, if God is resetting the board every single moment, then where everything is, everything, down to the most minute thing, God put it there on purpose. If it's there, it's deliberate. If it's there, it's on purpose. Which means if it's there, It's there for purpose, even the most minute thing. Then makes the question, is it as really as horrible as we think? That
You're in your
so
seat as the story begins. You notice the way he stands, his accent, his jacket. You notice the gun on his belt, a symbol of bravado. But you didn't think he'd use it. Well, you should have, at least according to a rule known as Chekhov's gun. Anton Chekhov, the 19th century Russian playwright, taught that in a well-written story, every detail must serve the plot. If in the first act you hang a pistol on the wall, it should be fired in the next. Otherwise, don't put it there. In a masterful story, nothing is extra. Every prop has a purpose. Every line carries weight. Nothing is random. Is there a storyteller more masterful than the creator of the universe? Is there any story more layered than the one you're living? One of Judaism's oldest mystical texts, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, describes God as a divine scribe, writing reality into being. We're not just characters in the story. We are the story. And just like a screen goes black when the projector stops, our world depends on God's light every moment. Creation isn't a one-time event. It's continuous, intentional, ongoing. If God stops writing, we stop being. And in his story, in your life, and in every event, every detail matters. Every scene, every object, every moment, every choice. If it's here, it has a role. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. Sure, things can look totally random, even horribly random at times. But the author gave us tools to seek the meaning, to live with purpose, even when the plot twists.
So this principle gives rise to a very fundamental principle of Hasidism, this idea, which is hashgacha pratit, divine providence. The problem with the word divine providence is that we use it so much that the world is almost like a word salad. We have a general connotation of what it means. We don't really truly catch the specifics. Hashgacha means God's observance and involvement, like the mashgiach, right, whose job it is to watch the kosher place, right, to make sure be involved, paying attention. For just that already means that we have a God that's observing and involved is already one major leap from where many, as we said, common sentiment could be. But then there is hashgacha klalit, the idea that God is generally involved. So the big things that occur for a reason, and the big things carry a lot of collateral with them. So little things occur, and those are either random or don't ascribe too much meaning to them, because you can't have the big thing blow into town like a massive storm, right? Blows in, right? And you could say, right, your flight got delayed because of a massive storm. You're sitting there on the tarmac, right? Or you get out of your car in the airport, and the massive storm has delayed your flight. Without any sense of hashgacha, klalit or pratit, without any idea of God's involvement in general or specific, without that idea, you would say, darn this storm, it just ruined everything. Right? I had a plan, the plan is ruined. The plan is ruined. Okay? Hashgacha klalit would say, no, God's plan is not ruined. Sometimes I guess I have to be ready to have my plan pushed aside for God's greater plan, right? And this kind of language you do hear from people, right? There's a greater purpose, there's a greater plan. So sometimes I have to kind of be sidelined for the greater good, right? That's all hashgacha klalit. Hashgacha pratit means that no, I am actively engaged in the plan because God reset the whole world, which means that if he said it this way with me here, I have a role to play. I am the story. I'm not the only one that's the story. Every piece is a story. That was the point of Chekhov's gun. It says if there's a gun in the thing, that's part of the story, right? That plays a role. There's no B-list actors. There are no ancillary things. There's no useless props. Everything has a direct part of the story. Each piece is moved deliberately. If you think that God is constantly writing the scene and he writes your name with your place and your location in, then that's very deliberate. Not only are you deliberate, this is how far hashgacha pratit goes. That stick that just blew by you, that leaf that just blew by you, it too is entirely part of the story. It could have been blowing that way or that way. It could have not existed. God wrote that leaf blowing in that direction in the story. You're limiting God to our own ability to direct so many things. God can't actually direct even that little leaf. He's got a whole world to direct. He's directing down to the smallest subatomic particle. That leaf is a big thing, all things considered. And it costs God 0% more sweat to be directing everything. But ultimately, even that leaf is a deliberate act. How many times when you've walked walked through a blustery day and understood that every leaf is a deliberate trajectory and in some way or another serving God's purpose?
With all due respect,
Mm-hmm.
why did God take the seventh day off? Seventh day of creation.
We talked about that big focus last week. So I'm going to answer you short, but definitely watch the recording from last week. God did not take the seventh day off. And it's proven by the very language that we say that God finished his work on the seventh day. That's incorrect. He finished his work on the sixth day. He rested on the seventh day. No. So but rather what that is connoting is that God did create something on the seventh day. He created the very concept of serenity. He created a day because what we talked about last week, that time, each day in time or each segment of time evokes a certain, is purposeful. The day 7 is the executive day. It's the day that you kind of come out of the rigmarole. It's a day of transcendence to remind you what you're supposed to be doing. So Shabbat is not a day off. Shabbat is very much a day on. God created and introduced the concept of taking a time to step out of the doing it, and remind yourself why you're doing it. Which is why that day you can't be doing it, because it'll be distracting you. Oh, because that's the point. God didn't stop. Most people understand that what did God do? He ceased, right? He ceased from what he was doing the 6 days, and he stopped working. You notice that it's interesting. The translation, all the time where it talks about this, and God completed his work, right, which he had done. So the word for work is avodah or yigiyah. It never uses that word. It uses the word malacha, creative production. God did not take a day off. Because if that was the case, then the way we would observe Shabbos is by going to a beach and sipping on a mojito, right? Right? And relaxing. Shabbos could be a very intense day. A very intensive day. Wouldn't that be a violation of the spirit of Shabbos if Shabbos was meant to just be a day of relaxing? Because that's what God did. He relaxed. No, God did not relax. God was as involved, in fact, in a certain way, significantly more involved that's his day, in fact. Shabbos is his day. But he was involved in a different perspective. He was involved in a day of transcendence. He gave us the ability to kind of step into the elevator on the day of Shabbos, climb and exist more in a spiritual state while we're still in this world. God created that paradigm on Shabbat. He wove a different fabric on the day of Shabbos that demands of you to not treat it like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Stop from what you're doing on Sunday, Monday. Don't stop, but stop what you were doing on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That is not the task du jour today. Today's comes with a different task list. So Shabbos is not God stopping from what he was doing, because as you said, very good. If God stopped for a moment, the world would cease to be. God stopped from the aspects of creation that he was doing on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he was introducing something brand new entirely, which is why Shabbos we have to treat as a completely different day. And pretty much the paradigms of the rest of the week don't apply to Shabbos, and what we do on Shabbos doesn't apply during the week. 6 days a week you shall work, or 6 days a week you shall engage in creative production. On Shabbos, you remind yourself why you're engaged in the creative production. You spend a day with the boss in his office, right? You get off the factory floor, right, and have the strategy session with the boss. That's what Shabbos is. Does that sound? Yeah. So, but back to this point, if we understand this, it's not just the general storm that is part of God's plan, but even the blowing the trajectory of every single leaf. There's a great poem by Rav Yontif Erlich. We I guess he's the soundtrack of this course, because last week we also I badly sang one of his songs translated in English about how the day of Yom Kippur itself draws out, right? That was a Yontif Erlich tune. He also writes one more for children that is a beautiful idea. And it goes like this. Basically, it's almost builds itself like I don't know, not like Dr. Seuss, but one of these kids' books that kind of it says a tzaddik is going on the path and he sees the leaf float and fall down, and he walks over to the leaf and says, "Leaf, why have you chosen to fly and land right over here?" And the leaf says, "Don't ask me, ask the branch who shook me off." So the tzaddik goes to the branch, the scholar goes to the branch and says, "Branch, branch, why did you throw off the leaf?" And the branch says, "Don't come to me, come to the wind. That was the one who pulled it off." So the tzaddik goes to the wind and says, "Wind, wind, why did you blow in just this kind of way to take the leaf off the branch and push it over there?" He says, "Don't ask me, ask my angel who directed me to do so." So it goes to the angel, and angel, angel, why did you have the wind go and blow this branch, this tree, this leaf off the branch and have it fall just there? The leaf says, "Why are you asking me? Ask the boss." The orders came from him. And so the tzaddik, the scholar, goes to God and says, "God, Bashefer, Bashefer, creator, creator, why did you command the wind? Why did you command the angel to direct the wind to blow the leaf off the branch onto the ground in that exact place?" And God says, "Well, go back and turn the leaf over." And so he goes and he turns over and he says, "And there was a little worm." And God says, "This worm was out in a boiling hot day. I was not able to handle the heat." And so the little worm called out to his creator. And so I commanded the angel to direct the wind to blow the leaf off the branch, and so that the leaf could fall onto exactly where this worm is sleeping and it could have its shade. This is a story that depicts a certain inherent truth. Everything that occurs is deliberate. Again, Nancy, does that make the question of the Holocaust significantly stronger? Yes, it does. But what else does it tell us? That 40-minute delay in the airport is now no longer an accident. And it's no longer outside of your plans. It's no longer a sabotage to what it is that you're supposed to do. In fact, it's exactly what you're supposed to do. And now you have to go and live with a state of open eyes and awareness and say, okay, clearly, this is my plan. I'm at the center of my plan right now. And my plan has me in the airport 40 minutes and an event that is beyond my control. So what is my role to play here? Right? So what is my play here? Right? Now, ultimately, the general mission we all know. The general mission is to do Torah mitzvot in this world, right? Advance the world towards its end game. But that doesn't, towards its end, towards its goal, towards the times of Mashiach, as we say, the era of the redemption, which is the point B of creation's point A. That is another important aspect to understand in all this. That Judaism is very clear that this whole thing is heading somewhere. Because ultimately, otherwise, it's just all arbitrary again. Unless we are banking gains, as it were. We're making progress in this. And we'll actually talk about that lesson 6. So where's this all headed? But for right now, imagine you were a secret agent, right? For an incredibly powerful syndicate. And they tell you, okay, here's the general mission. Here's the general mission. But when you will arrive, things will be provided, right? Then don't cue the James Bond music. Dun, 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 dun. He's going to walk and somebody's just going to walk by him and drop a briefcase, right? And anybody else would look at that and say that was just a random event, right? But he knows, he's got his eyes open. He's expecting these kind of things. He's expecting the tools and the directives to be given to him, right? So when that suitcase gets dropped off, everybody else sees that as random. He knows to see that as deliberate. You're God's agent in these situations. When things set themselves up, they're set up for this reason. There's a beautiful story with the Rebbe on this, where a group of women traveled for a conference. Chabad women traveled for a conference to Detroit. They had a beautiful conference, very inspirational. And they're all riding a high. They come to the airport. Huge storm. Airport is shut down for the night. Most likely into the rest of the huge ice storm. They were expecting 48 hours before the airport's up and running again. They're stuck now away from their homes, from their kids. These are all women who took off the time to do this, oftentimes leaving, a house full of kids at home, or whatever it was. And now they're stuck for the next 48 hours. Their high from this conference comes crashing down. In the meantime, one of them is giving a report back to the Rebbe's secretariat about how the conference went, et cetera, and she reports as a matter of complaint. It's like, it was also wonderful, et cetera, and now we're stuck by this massive snowstorm. We're going to be here for the next 48 hours, or for 24 hours. I can't remember what it was, 24 to 48 hours. The answer that was sent back has become a historic event. Because the Rebbe said, you just came busting out of that conference, so much inspiration, so ready to do amazing things. All of you, hundreds of women, all fired up. You think that storm is an accident? For a very specific reason, God wanted to keep all that inspiration in Detroit for the next 24 hours. Go figure out how you can bring... And these ladies did that. They immediately got the answer, heard the marching orders, and went and divided up and went to all these communities all over Detroit and shared what they had heard and whatever it was, because they went with such enthusiasm, because the Rebbe basically read them the riot act in the most positive way. Say, you guys are soldiers of light, and God himself kept you in Detroit for an extra day. That's what you got things to do. Would you believe there are multiple families right now that are currently religious because of that snowstorm? That was the moment where Detroit, they did not leave Detroit. The city was not the same after these women basically went out with that inspiration and hit the whole Detroit all at once. And literally caused a lasting change that reverberates till this very day. It's a true story. I'll tell you another true story. This one is just quintessential Rebbe. But I heard this from Rabbi Darren, and this moves to the next point. I'll tell you two stories that move to the next point. Because what happens, this kind of tells you what this till now, and I'm paraphrasing because all this is here. But I want to move through and I don't want to go over time. What time is it now? Okay. But what happens when you face failure? Where you put in the effort and you fail. You failed. At which point you exercised your free will. You believed you were on mission. You believed you did what you're supposed to do. And circumstances conspired that you fail. Well, what happened then to the divine plan? What happened then to the divine mission? Right? The ball came. The coaching, everything led to this moment. Up at bat. The pitch comes over. It's a pitch that I want. I'm all ready to hit it exactly as per the circumstances. And I wind back and I swing and miss. So that has to be, okay, at least that's called a failure. That's called things gone awry. Now, probably what I have to probably do is then try and make up for it, whatever it is. Not allow the dejection to sit too long, get back on the horse, and all that kind of stuff. No, wearing these kind of glasses, the hashgacha pratis glasses, the divine providence glasses, has you looking at the situation entirely different. And two stories. One story is from Rabbi Darren. And this is a story in three inspirational parts. Okay? Part one. He was planning his Chabad Shliach to Connecticut. One of Chabad's most successful pioneer shluchim. And was part of those that wrote the script on what Chabad outreach looks like back in the 60s and 70s. Now we're all doing it, and everybody's seeing the Chabad all over the place. But these were the guys, the original guys. One of the first things he wanted to do was throw a massive Jewish festival. When he finally kind of hit his stride, and people were, he was in the community, and people had accepted him as one of the leaders, the general community leaders, and he can galvanize the other community leaders. He wanted to put on this massive Jewish festival in Greenwich, Connecticut, with singers and kosher food stations and activities for the kids. And he put in everything. He got full buy-in. All the schools and the synagogues and everybody was going to come. He rented a huge fairgrounds, set up thousands of chairs in front of a big band shelf where the music and all the announcements were going to be, and then the carnival space, etc., etc. It was going to be great. It's going to be great until the weather called for an absolute deluge. And in this case, there was no miracle. It deluged. He woke up the day of the event and it was pouring, curtains of rain. He comes out to the site. He's sitting there on the stage of the band shell, looking out over a sea of empty white folding chairs, all perfectly set up. And he could just close his eyes and imagine everybody that would be there, be inspired by the Jewish music and the speeches and all that, and eating the good kosher food. And he's looking at the ruins, all the money that he invested, etc., etc. As he's sitting there, feeling really bad for himself, to be honest, as we can all imagine, he sees one pair of headlights, pull into the parking lot, start circling its way around through this empty parking lot, then kind of pull up into a parking spot, making sure it's right between the lines, because to leave room for all the rest of the cars the guy gets out of the car, the schnook comes all the way down through the aisles of the folding chairs to the front, sits himself down front and center, basically right across from where Rabbi Darren is sitting there moping, and he's ready. Let the event begin. Rabbi Darren looks at him and says, "Sir, I'm sure as you can tell, What kind of rain down? The events council. Okay. Guy gets up, gets back in his car, drives away. Rabbi Darren then later gives the Rebbe a full accounting, like he does about all the things. Got to, check in with the boss, tell him how things are going. Writes to the Rebbe, tells him about this event, down to the smallest detail about the washout, including the fellow who pulled it. Inspiration part number 2. The Rebbe writes back to him and says, I don't understand. You were setting up to have an event that would inspire thousands, which means that God downloaded into you. It didn't use that language. That language didn't exist in the 70s, but let's just roll with the language. Downloaded into you the package to be able of inspiration to inspire thousands. You had the ability to ignite thousands of souls, because if you were taking on that responsibility, God was giving you the wherewithal. Then it turned out that you didn't have thousands to inspire. You had the power to inspire thousands, and you could have all put it into this one person who showed up. Could you imagine how inspired and how life-changing for him this would be if you would have, in a sense, hit him with all that potential inspiration that God would have channeled through you, that it was enough for thousands of people, all channeled into one person. You could have changed this person's life forever. And you let him walk away, the Rebbe writes to him. And you sent him home. The Rebbe reframes this and tells him, you were expecting the event, you called the success of this event thousands of people's, thousands of butts in the seats, as they say, right? Turns out that God had a different plan for the success of this. One person showed up, and that could have been a person you changed for life. So was the event a failure, or was the event just different than you expected it to be? The failure was you not recognizing it and not wearing the glasses properly, maybe a little skewed. So now, inspiration part number 3. Rabbi Darren says, but now here's how I choose to also look at this. The event was a success because I got that message from the Rebbe and I've carried it with me every day of my life since. And I try to never let an opportunity pass, any circumstance, all because of that huge event that was a failure. My failure to understand it, the Rebbe's advice to me leads to have had a profound effect on me, so that I now live my life entirely different. And I have to say, tens of thousands of people over the course of my life have been affected by that whole set of circumstances. So where was the failure? Turns out that even the failure of the failure wasn't really a failure. The failure for him not living teed up the Rebbe giving him this advice that changed the course of his life and changed the course of Connecticut. Now, I'll follow up with one last story. Because sometimes you don't even get that. Sometimes you just get the failure. What do I mean by this? A friend of mine, we were sitting and having a farbrengen, which is that we get together, we inspire each other, we share stories, we share it's like a Hasidic pep talk that goes for 4 hours with each other. Copious amount of drinking happens to kind of lubricate the circumstance. And so one of us shares a story. So I want to tell you a story about a Chabad rabbi on a campus back in the 70s. Chabad rabbi had just arrived at campus and was doing things that really was not a thing yet, which was to go around and, point at a Jew and say, hey, are you Jewish? Right? Do you want to do a mitzvah? Do you want to put on tefillin, light Shabbos candles? And this was very outlandish in the 70s. Chabad wasn't a thing, really. but the brave pioneers that were doing this. So this was at City University of New York, CUNY, and Chabad rabbi was out there tabling with the table, trying to see a face, determine if they're Jewish, and as they're walking by, catch them with the, are you Jewish? Do you want to do this? So goes the story. The Chabad rabbi is there in the quad on a Friday, and he's got his tefillin for the guys and candles for the girls, and he's stopping people, and he's having certain successes and certain failures. Certain girl, college girl, walks by, says, "Are you Jewish?" And he says, "Yeah, but what of it?" He says, "I'd like to give you Shabbos candles to light." She says, "How dare you interfere and invade my life like that? If I wanted to do it, I would do it. It's none of your business if I will or won't." And she left in a huff. And no, she didn't turn around and come back and light the Shabbos candles. And this rabbi never saw her again the rest of his life, period. Because he was a visiting rabbi. He's not, at that point, the CUNY did not have a Chabad rabbi. But the rest of the story is what this rabbi never knew was this girl got back to her dorm room and she was still livid and on fire by this intrusion into her life. And when she came down a couple notches from the kind of the peak of her of fury, she became a little introspective and she said, "Why am I getting this upset?" Honestly, if some Hare Krishna person came in and said, "You want to do this," or whatever it was, I would just brush them off and carry on. Fine, they're asking. The answer is no, I'm not really interested, and I'll go get myself a coffee. Well, probably not a coffee. Starbucks didn't exist back then, but whatever it is. I'll go find whatever it is that I do to otherwise fill my time.
Coffee existed.
What?
Coffee exists.
Yeah, I would say, right. Yeah, chock full of nuts, right. Exactly. But ultimately, she says, "Why am I so bothered? Why am I so antagonistic to this?" And so, because she was a smart girl and she was, she forced herself to analyze, to explore. And she started to read a book or two or five, then started lighting Shabbos candles on her own, not through Chabad. Then slowly but surely, she started keeping, well, she lit Shabbos candles. So I'm going to light Shabbos candles. I'm then going to go out and party with my friends. If I'm going to light Shabbos candles, okay, so I'll do a Shabbat dinner. If I'm going to do a Shabbat dinner, let me invite some of my other Jewish friends. One thing leads to another. She becomes a Chabadnik. She does Baal Tshuva, she becomes a Chabadnik, marries a Chabad guy, also a Baal Tshuva, and builds a entirely Chabad family. The one who's telling us the story says the question is, how does anybody know this story? The Chabad rabbi does not know what happened. So how does anybody know the story? And he says, "Because I'm this woman's son. My friend in yeshiva for years, all because of what that rabbi definitely chalked up as a failure." But you don't need to be aware of the result. You just need to do your part. That's the thing. We don't need to know the result. Just need to know that there's a script written. I have a role to play. I'll play my role. My role will have to do not just with the generalities of the circumstance, but if it happens to be that my flight is delayed, that the person sitting next to me is sitting next to me, then maybe the delay of my flight has to do with this person. And the fact that they're sitting next to me. Maybe I start a conversation with them. Maybe they'll start a conversation with me and I just need to be ready to have them. Maybe if I walk into a Target and I'm made to be aware that the person there behind the counter looks like they're having a rough day. maybe my mission is the fact that I was made aware of that is because there's something I could say to this person or should say to this person. Because that's the way this works. Right? That's the famous story of Yosef. Right? Yosef had a life where his derailed every step, everything he tried to do was one step forward and 5 steps back. Right? His own brothers betrayed him and sold him down to Egypt. Then by his bootstraps, he starts pulling himself up, right? To go and be a productive manager of his master's estate, and he does, and he's successful, and he does it properly, and derailed again because he gets falsely accused by the woman who wants him to the wife of this master to betray his master, lose his integrity, and lie with her. He doesn't, and she betrays him and accuses him of lying with her. And his master, instead of backing him, ends up throwing him into the deepest, darkest hole in Egypt. At which point, this is a man who's tried his hardest, and every time he's tried, his life's gotten derailed. And then what happens? He comes in and he sees 2 people in prison in this deep dark hole with him that are none of his business. But he happens to notice that their faces are sad. Right? Famously, the butler and the baker. Right? And he goes and he says, Madua pneichem ra'im hayom. Why are your faces sad today? And that sets off the entire series of events. All because instead of turning around and saying, not my problem. Right? He says, if God is making me aware, I here in this deepest, darkest hole am a man on a mission. And if I'm here and I'm being made aware of 2 people that clearly can use a little help, then that's my call to action. I'm not here to judge them. God's not interested in writing a gossip column. He didn't make me aware of them just so we can, so Shlomo was had a rough day. I'm being made aware of a problem so I can do something about it. That's my mission. That's how you can remain not only optimistic, this is called being realistic. Nothing is a failure if I truly believe that everything that is happening has purpose. That no moment that's not optimism, that's realism. But it is what optimists do. It's called motivational coping. Where you draw motivation from what most people would be just doing in coping. It's, I'm going to focus on the positive. I'm going to be reframing instead of saying, oh, it's all over, I failed. I'm going to be reframing and saying, what is this that I could do? Okay, I thought it was going to be like this. Turns out it's not this, it's that. Success is measured differently than I thought it would be. This is Yosef. This is the exact words that a friend of mine, who I still learn with every single day, said to a prisoner on death row. I tell the story often, but when we were, again, Yeshiva Bachrim, in Chabad, you're constantly doing outreach. So in the summer, you're either being a counselor in a camp, trying to inspire children, to be proud Jews, etc., or he and a friend were part of the Aleph Institute, which is a network for people that do not have a community, either because they're serving, they're in uniform, or prisoners. So they give you a certain amount of money, they give you a car, and you drive around to all the prisons around the Midwest. He ended up in the Supermax on the schedule because somebody, an inmate in the Supermax, reached out to Aleph and requested to speak to a rabbi. Turns out this guy is on death row for crimes that were particularly a particularly terrible crime, but a crime that he did in his early 20s. He's been in the prison now for 40 years. He's in his 60s. And at this point, he's a very different person. Without going through all the detail, my friend is sitting opposite him. It wasn't what he expected. He expected to see some monster come on the other side of the glass. It turns out this entire old man, not old man, but a person who's definitely been aged by life and by years. And the man turns to him and asks this question of my 18-year-old friend. We were both 18. He says, I could appeal. I could push this and appeal further for a stay of execution, whatever it is. I have a case, but I'm tired of life. Nobody's out waiting for me on the outside. Everybody's given up on me. I spent all my life inside. I'm tired. I'm kind of just ready to throw in the towel and accept the execution. But I become more religious while in prison. It's kind of the thing. I found the God or whatever it is. I started my Judaism. I'm feeling a lot more connected. And I know that there's a thing that you have to, it says, "Ushmartem al nafsho seichem," that you have to try to safeguard your life. So if am I legally responsible in Judaism to fight the death sentence, or could I allow it to happen? Can you imagine this is what an 18-year-old guy has to give an answer to? So what did my friend tell him? My friend says, I can't answer that halachic question. I can get back to you with the halachic answer, but I'd like to posit a different attitude and approach. And he tells him this, tells him that you have to be able to see purpose in everything. You think you're looking at life, you want to let it go because you believe you've wasted your life, it's over. There's nothing that can be done with your life. And he tells him the story of Yosef. He says, even in the deepest, darkest prison, he was able to have a sense of purpose and meaning because everything, wherever you are, is exactly where you need to be. He says, I think you should draw inspiration from this Yosef. And he finishes off, and the guy looks at him and says, wow. He says, that's amazing. He says, yeah, I know, it's a very powerful idea. He says, no, it's amazing. He says, my Hebrew name is Yosef. The guy tells him. Fast forward about another 15 years. I'm here. My friend's a Chabad rabbi in Kensington. He gives me a phone call. Says, do you remember I told you the story? He says, the fellow is out and he's living a religious life. Says, ultimately, these things, the idea, if you can reframe and put on the glasses that every single moment is scripted by God, then nothing that happens to you is outside of the plan. And then the question is, are you paying attention to things? Are you living your life in that way that the circumstances you're in, you end up spilling coffee all over your shirt, and you're stuck at home for another 20 minutes. Maybe you're stuck at home in another 20 minutes. So as you're waiting for the shirt to go through the whatever it is, the washing machine and dryer, you pick up the phone and call somebody. You're late anyways, but you're late in a way that had you not even got on the road yet. So maybe this is time, spend a little time with the family, get on the phone with somebody from the relaxation of your home. You'll deal with your boss later. You'll figure it out anyways. But think of if this is happening to me, what is the specific call to action that this could be? Live life that way, and you're never derailed. Live life that way, and failure is only if you allow it to be. Now, it doesn't mean be delusional and just sit around and do nothing. That's the opposite. Always say, what is this moment calling me to do? And then again, there's no empty space in your life. There's no derailed. And again, there's no failure. All right, everybody? We will last course as a lesson next week. As we said, where is this all headed? What is each of our specific roles in the kind of in the great master plan of all of creation? Also, Hanukkah is coming up. All the things that we are doing for Hanukkah, including being at the Bethesda Row on the first night of Hanukkah, Sunday night. Then we're going to have Friday night a shul Friday night dinner, the Friday night of Hanukkah, which is the 19th, I believe, and other such programming. So stay tuned, including a women's event coming up on the 10th. So we have a women's event on the 10th. We have the menorah lighting on the 14th. We have the menorah car parade on the 17th. We have the Friday night dinner with the community on the 19th. All right, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Absolutely. All the best, everybody.